Support for The Kyle Hyman Show comes from Notre Dame Federal Credit Union and listeners like you who donate to Redeemer Radio, your local Catholic radio station.
It's The Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
On today's show, I stopped by the Catholic Worker Homes in South Bend to learn more about this mission and movement started by Servant of God Dorothy Day and Peter Moran. I talk with two members of the community, John McLean and Casey Mullaney, about what attracted them to the community and how it has had an impact on them. And we'll discuss the good work that's happening in South Bend because of this community.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kyle Hyman.
This is Kyle Hyman. I am here in the Catholic Worker House, one of the Catholic Worker Houses. Joining me is John McLean and Casey Mullaney. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here where you live and inviting me into it. For those that aren't familiar with the Catholic Worker, we actually had recently, Dr. Terrence Wright wrote a book about Dorothy Day, and I interviewed him. That was back in episode 484. If people want to go back and listen to that, great, kind of giving some background of Dorothy Day, but she founded the Catholic Worker movement. Can you give us a little bit of the backstory on Dorothy Day and the Catholic Worker?
Sure. When people think of the Catholic Worker, they, I think of Dorothy Day first, but we always want to mention, I'm pointing over at our wall where we've got a photo of both of our founders. Mm-hmm. Dorothy Day and Peter Moran together founded the movement.
Dorothy Day is bigger in that picture. She gets a bigger picture.
She's got a bigger picture. I'm sure those were gifted to us. Okay. So Dorothy and Peter founded the movement together in the 1930s in New York City. Dorothy was a radical journalist, active in the labor movement, recent convert to Catholicism. And Peter Moran was a French laborer and kind of a mystic and a philosopher and a wanderer. So very much somebody who kind of came out of the medieval tradition. And, Dorothy, when she converted to Catholicism, was really struggling and discerning to find a way to continue her activism and her involvement with radical politics in this country, especially her commitment to anti-war activism, to serving the cause of the laboring people, many of whom were immigrants. And she was trying to figure out a way that she could do this from her newfound Catholic faith. She'd been sent down by Commonweal magazine to Washington, D.C. To cover a march that was taking place right around the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. She was praying in the National Shrine, and she asked God to help her figure out this problem, help her find a way to be of service in this way. And when she got back to New York City the next day, Peter Moran was waiting on her porch for her. So the movement began actually with a newspaper.
Right.
Dorothy and Peter started a newspaper together called The Catholic Worker, titled after the communist paper, The Daily Worker, which was very popular at the time in New York City. It was read by folks of a number of different social classes, but was directed to the common person, to the laborer. So they wrote this paper, and they started talking about the social program of the Catholic Church and how the church had historically put itself in the service of the poor, and how the social and economic program that had been promulgated by the early church and the saints up through, the social tradition began with Rerum Novarum, how this could be a force to transform politics in America and the social fabric of this country. And at that time, people began, once they started reading this paper, people started showing up and saying, in your paper, I read that you talk about feeding the hungry and sheltering the homeless, and I'm hungry and I have nowhere to sleep tonight. So Dorothy and Peter realized that they needed to not just write, but act. And they began opening houses of hospitality in New York City, and the movement took off from there.
How did it take off, do you think? I mean, there's a lot of people that have good ideas. There's a lot of people that are doing good things and don't necessarily get followers and people to jump on board.
I think it took off because both of them threw themselves completely and totally into what they were doing. And what they were doing was Peter's vision. So Dorothy, as Casey mentioned, gets almost all of the credit when it comes to founding the movement. But what Dorothy would say is just, I'm pointing at Peter and at the vision that he had for creating a new society out of the shell of the old. And Peter's thought, he was a sort of street preacher type, and so a lot of Peter's thought has been collected in what he wrote, these short, pithy little, almost poems.
They're almost like epigrams.
Yeah, they are. They're almost like epigrams. They're called easy essays. They're very short. They're delightful. I think they're all collected on the website called easyessay.org. And so his sort of social program can be found scattered throughout these easy essays. And depending on which essay you're looking at, it's always 3 parts. But depending on which essay you're looking at, the 3 parts sometimes vary. They all have the same common core. But basically, it's hospitality. So opening your home in the same way that the first Christians did to people who are in need, and performing the works of mercy, the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, out of your own home at personal sacrifice.
Yep.
And then action on behalf of those who, for various reasons, cannot speak or cannot act. So people who have been oppressed, or people who, for reasons of their social location, either based on race or based on class or disability, are either unable or unwilling or placed at a disadvantage to sort of advocate for their own cause and are thus left behind. And so we engage in a lot of political action because of that. And then the third part is either a return to the land or a sort of general anarchist component. Peter and Dorothy were both anarchists, and that doesn't mean blow buildings up, because they were also both pacifists, and they believed that the social program of the Catholic Church was a pacifist program. And if you look at the Catholic social teaching documents, you can see from Rerum Novarum onwards, actually, you can see the tradition of just war sort of slowly drop out and become less and less justifiable in favor of an increasingly pacifist position.
We can see that through Gaudium et Spes and then the challenge of peace.
So the reason this took off is because Peter's vision was so crystal clear, and they executed it just in the very, in the very way they breathed.
Okay. There's a lot to break open here, and I have a lot of questions to follow up on this, talking about just war and the process of starting the Catholic worker movement worldwide, what's happening, but also I want to hear what's happening here in South Bend, but this is going to have to come up. So when we come back, we'll have more from the Catholic Worker House here in South Bend. This is Kyle Hyman. I am here in South Bend at the Catholic Worker House, one of the Catholic Worker Houses. There's a men's house and a women's house. Is that correct?
Yes.
And this is the women's house?
Yep. This is the yellow living room.
How many people in each house?
Oh, gosh.
Let's count by floor.
Okay. So in the women's house, on the 3rd floor right now, me, Maria Teresa, who else is up there? Alexandra. Then on the 2nd floor, Donna and Melanie, and Emma and Emily, and then Ruth is on the 1st floor right now. So I think that's 8.
Okay.
Or 9. 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Okay. We have 2 cats too.
And then in the men's house, I believe the number is 9 as well.
I think it's about the same right now.
Yeah.
It fluctuates a lot. People come and go. Folks are welcome to stay as long as they like.
The total number of our community tends to hover between about 18 and 25.
Okay. And we're talking with John McLean and Casey Mullaney, and you are both. Is there a difference between like a transient resident and a more long-term resident? Like, are you more official members of the Catholic worker movement, or is
Not really.
There's no differentiation?
In this particular worker, the St. Peter Claver worker, we have a sort of official distinction between staff and guests.
Okay.
whether that distinction is useful is up for debate.
It's loose.
It's a very loose distinction. Everyone here contributes.
Everyone works. We're all in this together. It's definitely a solidarity project.
In the Catholic worker movement as a whole, there's rarely much of a distinction in other houses.
We have guests who've been here longer than any of the staff members.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long have each of you been here?
Oh gosh, let's see. I moved into this house almost exactly 2 years ago, I think. Yeah. I moved out to South Bend a year prior to that. And how long have you been here now?
I've been here about a year and a half. I've been on the street about a year and a half. And when I say on the street, I mean
South St. Joseph
South
Street.
St. Joseph Street, which is the street that both of our houses are on. We have a sort of very loose extended community that is made up of probably 10 out of the 12 houses on this block.
Yep.
So we refer to it as it's the street.
The street.
How much of that was people moving to the area to be part of this community and buying or renting a house near you, and how much of it was they were there and you talked to them and built this community?
I think it's definitely a little bit of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're located in the Monroe Park neighborhood, and we feel very blessed to be here because we have a active and supportive neighborhood association. There's many children who live here, and we've been able to get to know some of them through some formal activities. This community used to do a day camp called Camp St. Joseph, as well as just, being out and about, gardening, going for walks, having folks over for dinner. So it's a mix. I moved to the street when I moved to South Bend with the express purpose of being close to the Catholic worker.
And I was looking at catholicworker.org and it said there's 245 communities worldwide.
Yeah, that number has expanded significantly over the last 15 years. I think about 15 to 20 years ago, that number was about half. So we had around 120 communities globally in the 90s, and now we have about almost 250. What defines a Catholic worker community is very, very loose. As I believe we mentioned in the first segment, it's an anarchist movement. There's no central governing body. There's simply a loose, informal network of people that know other people. And the way you start a Catholic worker house is by hanging a sign out in your front lawn that says Catholic Worker House.
And you should brew a pot of coffee.
Right, yes, that's the other informal requirement. Although I'm sure there are communities that don't drink coffee.
Now, does this go back to Dorothy Day and Peter Claver? Was that something that
Peter
they
Moran.
instituted?
Peter Moran.
Peter Moran.
Yes.
Who's Peter Claver?
Peter Claver is the saint that this community is named after.
Okay.
We have two Peters.
I was confused. Does that go back to them just saying, hang up a sign and you've
Yes.
got a Catholic worker
Absolutely.
movement?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. Because it's an anarchist movement, it's really hard to nail down what you might mean by, say, the quote unquote typical Catholic worker. There really isn't such a thing.
Every house is different.
Yeah. Generally speaking, Catholic workers tend to be socially radical, tend to align themselves with the interest of the poor, tend to be pacifist, tend to be very pro-life. And I mean that in the sense of a seamless garment. So pro-life when it comes to abortion and when it comes to capital punishment. So no death penalty, no war, no taking of human life. Yeah.
Cardinal Bernardine is the one who articulated that phrase. And I've really appreciated getting to know some of his writing on the idea of the seamless garment. I think it really ties in well with the way that Dorothy would speak about the mystical body of Christ. We are all members of Christ's mystical body. And this is the reason that we don't drop bombs on each other.
Yeah. And just war theory would say it's okay in self-defense.
Just war theory has developed significantly.
With a lot of,
Right.
Lots of caveats.
conditions.
Yeah, since it was sort of, since Augustine really, who was the first in the Catholic Church to sort of articulate something resembling a just war theory, which it's significant that just war theory didn't arise until after the church aligned itself with the imperial powers. So with the church becoming the sort of official state religion with Constantine and all of that. But just war theory underwent a significant revision in the 16th century with Suarez, and then underwent more significant revisions over the last 200 years. So there's, depending on who you ask, many different conditions. The bottom line is, if you look at Catholic social documents and the Catholic social tradition coming from the Pope and from the magisterium over the past 50 years, 50 or 60 actually, it's been pretty clearly articulated that basically no war today meets the requirements, can possibly be just. So at least practically, that's a pacifist position, even if it's not an absolute pacifism.
When you mention anarchy, red flags probably pop up in people's heads of what it means to be an anarchist. I like this concept of there's no really rules. There's there's nobody to report to, and just start a Catholic worker house. How can there be any kind of consistency, and what's to prevent somebody to call themselves a Catholic worker house that is completely contrary to anything that Dorothy Day would ever endorse?
There's nothing.
Yeah, there isn't.
Peter always said you should try to be what you want the other fellow to be. And that's really the best that any of us can hope to do.
The reason that despite the complete and total lack of rules and regulations that we have, the reason that houses do often share sort of a common ethos is because the whole point of the Catholic worker movement is to be a very concrete and radical way of living the gospel. So the living the life and the works and the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ in 20th and 21st century America, and in the United States, and now internationally. So it's meant to be a way of living the gospel in a racialized capitalist, global capitalist society. And that looks very different in terms of the details and the nitty gritty, but it does mean that there's a common thread.
It's still the same gospel that St. Benedict tried to live, and Mary Magdalene tried to live, and Mary, Martha, and Lazarus tried to live. But we all know that context changes, and this is the way that, two people almost 100 years ago found to articulate it. And of course, the worker today looks in many ways very different than it did in 1932 and 1933. But as long as we are pointing towards the gospel, that's what really matters. And the worker will survive in some capacity, or it won't, but the gospel will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're here in South Bend at the Catholic Worker House and talking about the Catholic Worker Movement and all the good work that you guys have been able to do. How long has these houses been in operation in South Bend?
This Catholic Worker has been around for about 14 or 15 years. It started over on West Washington Street, and then I think 2 to 3 years later moved to this street, which is South St. Joseph. So these houses have been here for about 11 years as the Catholic Worker. It started with 3 people, one of whom is still here today. Her name is Margie File, and she's the leader of our community. And she's
that sounds like some structure right there.
Yes.
A leader of the community.
Yes.
So, every community is different. We have, in this particular community, there are a lot of young people who are in some way affiliated with the university who come for a time. John and I are actually both doctoral students in the theology department, in addition to being members of this community. And for the sake of having, somebody who was able to make a lifelong commitment, one of the decisions that this community made was that Margie would be sort of our informal director. So she's one of the original founding members. She's the only one of the 3 who's still here in South Bend, and many, many other hands and souls have passed through here.
The joke about the original Catholic Worker is they would say, we're an anarchist community, but Dorothy is the head anarch.
Yeah.
So we might have a little bit of that going on here too.
Yeah, sure. Well, how did you each first become aware of the Catholic Worker Movement? Or I don't know if you were first introduced to a Catholic Worker House or the paper, or what was your original introduction?
I originally encountered the Catholic Worker through the Houston Catholic Worker, which is called Casa Juan Diego. And it was run by Mark and Louise Swick, and it's still being run by Louise Swick. Mark passed away 2 years ago. But they have one of the largest, probably
I think the largest.
Yeah, it is probably the largest Catholic worker
in the world.
They have more than 10, I think they have 10 houses. They capped it at 10, I think. And a huge hospitality network. And Houston is a huge site for, I think it is the central hub for human trafficking in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And so they have a huge focus on immigration and immigrants, and on human trafficking victims. And Houston, being such a large city, just has such a huge population. So their worker ended up becoming a really, really large operation. I met them in Houston. Oh gosh, that would have been close to 8 or 10 years ago now. And was really inspired, but wasn't in a place at that time where I could join a Catholic worker house or really participate more in the movement. It wasn't until the past couple of years that I was able to get involved more again. And that brought me here a year and a half ago.
Casey, what was your introduction to Catholic worker?
Well, I'm from New York.
Whereabouts?
Upstate, the Albany
Okay.
area. Yep. And when I was in high school, I had a job washing dishes at the Catholic Retreat Center up in the Adirondack Mountains. And one day I was standing at the dish counter and a woman walked in with Dorothy Day's face emblazoned on her t-shirt. And I recognized it and I asked her about it. And it turns out that she was a Catholic worker from Fresno, California. Her name was Liza Apper. And she was on retreat with her daughter, who was about my age. And I got to know this family over the course of the week that they were staying with us and became really, really interested in the movement. So when I was in college, I went to a small school that had a winter session, and I was connected through the pastor of my church, Father Bob Longabucco, to the Albany Catholic Worker House, and helped with their work for a month. Fred, Bob, and Diana founded the worker together. They'd been best friends since college, and Father Bob went to seminary and became ordained, and Fred and Diana got married, and so they've been involved in the worker movement for almost 17 years now. So I was able to spend some time with them, and that was just like a deeply formative experience, although it was short. I joined the Jesuit Volunteer Corps after college and was sent to Syracuse, New York, where I worked with an organization that assisted mostly men, also women, who were getting out of prison, and spent a good deal of my free time at the Unity Kitchen Catholic Worker Community. And by that point, I knew that the worker was what I wanted to do with my life. So when I was looking at graduate programs, I looked and made sure that there was a Catholic worker house in each of the cities that I applied to, and I ended up here.
All right. Well, I want to hear more about what's happening here in South Bend with the Catholic worker movement, and maybe a little bit more too about what's happening worldwide with the Catholic worker movement. So that's all coming up here on the Kyle Hyman Show in South Bend at the Catholic Worker House. This is Kyle Hyman. I am here at the Catholic Worker House in South Bend. Joining me is two of the members of the Catholic Worker movement, John McLean, Casey Mullaney. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
Yeah.
Members of the Catholic Worker movement?
Yes,
Absolutely.
definitely.
All right. What are some of the things that are happening? You've got the two houses here right across the street from each other, the men's house, the women's house. What are some of the things that you do in the houses? And what are some of the things that happen maybe beyond the walls of these homes?
We have dinner. Our community eats together every night, but on Thursdays we have a really big open house potluck that everyone and anyone is invited to. Hospitality is one of the core tenets of the Catholic worker movement. It's one of the things that hangs all these very different communities all across the country and the world together, is we all have a commitment to hospitality. So our Thursday night potluck dinner is one of the ways that we are able to practice hospitality. Usually probably about 40 people show up any given week. And when it's nice out, we have dinner on the back patio at the women's house. And when it's not nice out, we eat at the men's house. But it's a really wonderful opportunity to welcome people into our home. Sometimes folks come because they need a meal. Sometimes folks come because they need company. But a meal is, I think, a good way to fulfill like both a spiritual and a corporal work of mercy at the same time. And being able to cook from scratch and offer that out into the world as a gift, I think is something very much in keeping with Peter Moran's interest, in particular in a return to a way of life more centered on agriculture and growing things in the seasons.
And when you say 40 some people coming. Is this in addition to the residents here or including?
That's including, yeah.
Okay.
So there's probably about 15 of us who live in the houses at any given meal. And then our guests might be folks that we know from the neighborhood or folks that we know from our drop-in center, might be students, might be people from our church. All kinds of people show up. So it's always a mix, and it's always a lot of really interesting conversations.
But you literally welcome anybody. I mean, on your website, I think it even says, visit us each night at 6:30 p.m. for dinner on the website.
We try to keep Sunday evening dinner to just family, just the folks who live in the houses, so it doesn't get overwhelming. But it's really important to us to be able to offer a meal to anybody who needs it anytime.
But also people that would just be curious to learn more or just want to get to know you and they want to hear more about the Catholic Worker Movement.
And that's actually when we have extra space in the houses and we have people who are inquiring about living with us, whether that be as people who are coming to get off of the streets or whether that's people coming to help out and volunteer their time. We usually suggest that coming to dinners repeatedly is one of the best ways to get to know our community.
And then what does it mean to be part of the community? Do you, besides the meals, do you hang out together? Do you pray together? Do you do service work together? What kind of things?
Yes. So we do evening prayer after dinner, and we have a Tuesday work morning and we have a Wednesday work morning, which are both fairly flexible. Tuesdays tends to be focused on the houses and Wednesdays tends to be focused on our drop-in center. And that actually, this would be a good time to segue into talking about the drop-in center because that's a huge component of what we do at this particular worker. So we mentioned earlier, each house of hospitality, each Catholic worker community is different. And so some do a lot more hospitality and some do a lot more action. This particular Catholic worker is one that does almost, I won't say almost exclusively, but its major operation is hospitality. And that's both in each house of hospitality and in our drop-in center, which is called Our Lady of the Road. And it's just a block and a half away in downtown South Bend. And it's open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday mornings. And we serve between 100 and 140 people every morning with a hot breakfast. And we have a laundry counter where people can do their laundry. They can take hot showers. We have a donations room for clothing and other items. And am I leaving anything out from
the chapel? Oh,
yes. And we have a chapel which was recently constructed and dedicated by the bishop a year and a half ago.
On site there?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And we do mass there every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Please come join us. It's a lovely mass. And we have a bunch of other miscellaneous things that are operating out of our drop-in center, which these things are largely a function of the extended community, I would say. So we have a food co-op called Common Goods that operates out of Our Lady of the Road, and that's open every other Wednesday at,
I think, from 5:30 to 7:30. They do need help with cleanup and setup.
And a local beekeeper operates out of there. And
it's the Peace Bees project.
His honey is delicious.
I bet.
We have a fledgling community woodworking shop called St. Joseph's Workshop.
Catholic Peace Fellowship uses that space.
What does the workshop produce?
Right now, so when I say it's fledgling, I mean a year and a half ago, the building that we're in used to be an old True Value hardware store.
Okay.
In the front, and the back of it used to be an auto parts manufacturing floor. And so the workshop is in the old loading dock. A year and a half ago, it was full of junk. So over the past year and a half, we've cleared it out, brought in a bunch of tools, hand tools and power tools. It's a hybrid workshop. And right now, a lot of what we're doing is just things that are needful for the community, and bringing in kids and doing projects with them. We hope to expand what we're doing, perhaps into selling religious goods, whether those be small things like crosses or larger things like coffins. And it just generally is supposed to be a space where any member of the community could come and use the space as needed.
Working with our hands is something, doing manual labor is something that is important to the Catholic worker movement. And that's a value that really dates back to the Benedictines. And we take a lot of what we do from the Benedictine tradition, everything from the agricultural work to the interest in stability and having a presence in a neighborhood, especially where I think there are a lot of narratives of hopelessness that get spread around. I think those are certainly not the whole story of our neighborhood here in Monroe Park. But also, the idea of manual labor, work and prayer. Dorothy Day became, later in her life, a Benedictine oblate because of this, really, really strong interest in seeing the path of work and prayer as a spiritual path.
All right. Well, coming up, I want to talk more about what's happening here and all these different social things that you have going on. So we'll talk about that more from the South Bend Catholic Worker Movement here on the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio. This is Kyle Hyman. I am here with John McLean and Casey Mullaney from the Catholic Worker Movement here in South Bend. Been learning a lot about the Catholic Worker Movement, and I had no idea how much stuff that you guys were doing in town. It just seems like you're a little bit of everything, a little bit of everywhere. And we talked about the outreach that you have, Our Lady of the Road, which is that an official Marian title, or is that just something you made up?
I think that's something we made up.
I don't know.
I'm sure there's Our Lady of the Way or something.
Yeah,
probably.
If you've driven past on Main Street, kind of heading south away from downtown in South Bend, you've gone past our building and you'll recognize it by the mural, which is a mural of Mary, kind of painted in the style of like an Orthodox icon, and in front of her is the city, and there's a whole really beautiful story, beautiful and also sad story of how this mural kind of came to be. But Mary is offering the city where people are doing the works of mercy to her son, who's shown crucified in the mural. So it's a really beautiful depiction of kind of what we hope to be doing at the Worker. And you're certainly welcome to stop by and take a look at it for yourself.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that you guys have going on?
So most of our work is either in one of the houses of hospitality or at the drop-in center. But I think trying to capture what we do just in terms of the actual specific works of mercy is a little bit difficult. I think what we do is really try and live out the vision of Peter Moran. And what that is he would talk about the Catholic worker as a way to create a space where it's, quote, easier to be good. And the way that we do that is by building a new society out of the shell of the old, and all of the other, again, these are pithy phrases from...
But I want to be... I don't want to lose that. What was the shell of the old that we built the new society out of?
Well, we're still in process with that.
Yes.
Okay. One of the ways that this happens is through the reclamation of abandoned space. The houses, most of the houses that you see on this street were old Studebaker mansions, and they were places that had, been these very lavish, expensive homes for wealthy families, and then had fallen into disrepair. But our hope when we purchased these homes is that we would make a space which was warm and inviting and hospitable, but not just for the wealthy, but also for the poor, for anybody who came off the streets, either to stay or to come and join us for a meal. The building where Our Lady of the Road is housed now was another space that had been a place that was economically productive and was contributing to the common good, by providing for the needs of a hardware store. That business is no longer in operation. But what we hope is that we're able to kind of make a contribution there to the common good. We also, everybody comes to the worker out of a place of need and brokenness, whether they come to be on staff or they come because they are in need of a place to stay. So what we hope is we can create a space in which, those kind of like deep needs for love and for care and for belonging, as well as the physical and material needs of persons, can be met. So
the shell being a physical space that you're renovating, it could be the emptiness of inside of a person that they're hurting. Is there also a shell of the Catholic Church that we see, like a gap that's missing in the social teaching that you're trying to restore as well?
Quite as much. It's important to understand the context in which Peter Moran and Dorothy Day talked about these ideas, which is to say the 1930s, 40s, 50s. So after World War I, during the gear up for World War II, during and after World War II. So society was in a huge flux, right? And political ideas were at a really high level of fervor. And so when Peter Moran talks about the shell of the old and about society in general, he's talking about the ills that come along with capitalism held up as an absolute, or with communism held up as an absolute, or with any of the other systems of government. For instance, he's talking about all of those kinds of things. And of course, those things are still in operation today, especially capitalism, which is now globalized, right? Capitalism essentially won. And so part of what we do in the Catholic Worker is try to dissociate ourselves from the systems of production that feed back on themselves and cause harm to the worker and cause harm to the poor. So we try and be self-sustaining. That's why we have our own garden, for instance. And we try and use things that other people have discarded. A lot of our other food comes from the food bank, for instance, which companies discard either because it doesn't look very good, so they can't put it on the shelves, or it's starting to go moldy, or it's past the sell-by date. And a lot of the things that we get, the tools that we use and all of those sorts of things are donations. So that's sort of what we mean, is using things that are broken and borrowed.
So not as much looking for a gap that needs to be filled in the church, because I think, we as Catholic workers believe that the Catholic Church has a social program, and it has one that has been in existence since the time of Christ. It just needs to be lived out anew in every generation.
Sure.
But we do see places in society where there is a shell, where there's emptiness and brokenness. And those are the places that we hope to move into and fill with light.
Yeah. How can people get involved?
Come to dinner.
Okay.
So we are very much in need of help always. And there is a place for anyone with any time, any skills, any talents, to come and be of service here. Thursday night dinner would be a great time to drop in. We welcome anyone, whether you can come regularly or only come once. Wednesday night for Mass would also be a good time to come and join us.
A lot of what people volunteer and give in their own ways, and we encourage that. We don't have very much of a program for volunteers, other than we encourage you to come and get to know us through dinner, through Mass, through volunteering at Our Lady of the Road. And I'll talk about that specifically in a moment. And in getting to know us, the needs of the community will become apparent. We do have a lot of needs. And people volunteer in very small ways and in very big ways. And it's all very, 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 very appreciated. We have someone who brings us pastries several times a week from a bakery. She just drops them off at the house.
Yeah.
We have someone who brings bananas once a week and drops them off at. And we have other people who volunteer on a weekly basis and help cook dinner. One of the primary ways of volunteering is at Our Lady of the Road. And you can come with a group or you can come on your own. You don't need to tell us beforehand, although it's appreciated if you do. And we open the doors for our guests, which are mostly from the population of people who are homeless in South Bend. We open the doors for our guests at 8 a.m. on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And we encourage volunteers to get there around 7:30 in the morning.
Okay.
We will be there at 7, getting coffee going and all of that. And volunteers at Our Lady of the Road, often with first-time volunteers, what we have you do is serve coffee because it gets you out among the people and gets conversations going. And it's a good way to sort of begin to see how things work. And then we can go from there.
Did you say Our Lady of the Road serves, was that 150?
Between 100 and, I would say 100 and 130, 140, something like that.
We don't keep count, so we just try to figure out how much milk we've gone through.
We're at the Catholic Worker House in South Bend, chatting with a couple of the members of the community here. And you mentioned things being donated and food and things like that. How do you pay electric bills and rent and things like that?
We are entirely dependent on the generosity of others.
We depend on donations. We don't receive any money from the government. Our Lady of the Road is a nonprofit organization, so donations to Our Lady of the Road are tax exempt. Donations to the houses, the St. Peter Claver Catholic Worker houses, are not tax exempt because it's actually a very Catholic worker thing. Our houses are not incorporated nonprofits because paying taxes for us is a way of being in solidarity with the poor, because the poor have no choice about paying taxes. Often the case is in this country, if you're rich, you have any number of loopholes to get out of paying your taxes. But if you're poor, you don't really have much of a choice. Either you pay your taxes or eventually the IRS comes for you.
Yeah.
And so, but donations to the houses, donations to Our Lady of the Road are always appreciated, big or small.
Everything helps.
Everything helps because we are entirely dependent on them. We have no other consistent form of income.
And, traditionally, the Catholic Worker, because of Dorothy and Peter's dedication to doing the works of mercy at a personal sacrifice, this isn't. It's not a career opportunity if you're looking to make a lot of money. It's very much a labor of love. None of us are paid for our work. But we're so grateful to, especially the churches in our diocese, have just done so much for us. We really, really appreciate all of the donations of both time and treasure. Well,
you mentioned contact us if you're able to before you come, so we know that you're coming. I want to give people a heads up to get your pen out. We're going to give them an email address. Before we do, though, while they're getting their pen and paper right now, what's something that you have learned, or in what way are you a better person for being a part of this community?
I think one of the great gifts of the worker has really been just to have. I know so many more people than I would without the worker. And I think in this country, we typically know people of our own race and we know people of our own social class. And even when you are a member of a church and are going, to worship every Sunday morning, it can be difficult to meet folks who are not like you. So the worker has been a place where I have encountered those who are very different from myself, and have formed deep relationships that I treasure above almost anything I have. We met our godchildren through the worker, and they bring more grace into our lives than just about anybody else that we know.
Nice.
Pope Francis talks about an integral human ecology, and I think the Catholic worker is a very good way of living that out. Care for the environment and care for people all at once. And seeing those as not two separate things, but as completely and totally integrated and enmeshed. So I think that's probably one of the things that the worker has taught for me, is that taking care of people and taking care of your environment is one and the same. And I mean that both your environment locally and globally.
All right. Well, where can people get more information about the Catholic Worker here in South Bend, and maybe some contact info if they have questions or they want to support in some way or want to be a part of the community?
So we are the Peter Claver Catholic Worker in South Bend, Indiana. Our phone number is 574-520-7745. Hopefully someone will pick up.
Use the email address.
The email address is definitely the more reliable. And that is Peter Claver House. That's all one word, no punctuation, no spaces. peterclaverhouse@gmail.com.
Spell Cleaver for him.
And that's, to spell it out, PeterClaverhouse@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let me have a tour of the space and be able to share the work that you're doing with people. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much for coming over.
Thank you very much.
Our special thanks to Notre Dame Federal Credit Union for underwriting this show and for their support. We have a bunch of special guest hosts lined up for next week. And until then, remember to leave room for the Holy Spirit.